I still remember the first time I saw the bag. It wasn't fancy, not like something out of a movie, just an old, slightly worn leather purse sitting on the counter of a small antique shop. But there was something about it, something that made my heart skip a beat, as if it was calling me, whispering my name. I didn't know why, but the moment I touched it, I felt a strange warmth running through my fingers, like it was alive. I didn't realize then that this little bag would change my life forever, that it would bring me wealth, opportunity, and a taste of the life I'd always dreamed of. At first, it was subtle. I would reach into the bag and find a coin. One coin, then another. It didn't feel like magic exactly, more like the universe finally noticing me. I kept it hidden, of course, tucked away in my room where no one could see. I knew better than to let anyone know how lucky I had become. But keeping secrets in a house full of people obsessed with money is impossible. It didn't take long for my family to notice something had changed. They saw my bank account swelling, my confidence growing, the opportunities landing at my feet, as if the world itself had shifted in my favor. And with every passing day, their eyes followed me a little longer at the dinner table, their voices a little sharper in conversation, their smiles a little too forced. At first, I tried to ignore them, thinking they'd eventually grow used to my success, maybe even be happy for me. But happiness was never their interest. Greed was. It started small. Comments here, questions there. "Where did you get that money?" my mother would ask casually, though her tone was far from casual. "It's so strange how things are going so well for you all of a sudden." Lena would roll her eyes, muttering under her breath about lucky streaks and people who get ahead unfairly. Milo was worse. He'd offer to help me manage it, to protect my interest, when in reality, he just wanted access. Every time I politely refused, I could see it in their faces, the subtle flash of irritation, the hint of calculation. They didn't care about me, they cared about the bag. Their attempts to manipulate began in ways that were almost polite at first. Invitations to family dinners with no strings attached, casual advice about spending, gentle nudges toward sharing my secret. But it escalated quickly. One night, I overheard Lena and Milo whispering late in the living room. "If we can get her to show us even a small amount, we could—" Milo started, but Lena hushed him sharply. "Not here. We need a plan. We can't just ask for it." Even in the darkness, their desperation radiated. They weren't just curious. They were plotting, scheming, and counting on my generosity or my naivete to get what they wanted. The more I tried to avoid them, the bolder they became. Phone calls in the middle of the night, unexpected visits to my room, casual accidents where they would brush past me in the kitchen, hoping I'd drop a coin or let something slip. They didn't see me as a sister, a daughter. They saw me as a means to an end. Their greed was growing like a wildfire, and I was standing right in the center of it, trying not to get burned. At first, I felt angry. I couldn't believe they were capable of such obvious selfishness. How could they not see that I was more than the bag, that I deserved respect, love, and boundaries? But as days turned into weeks, I began to notice something else. Their obsession was predictable. Their moves followed a pattern. Every whisper, every suggestion, every question was driven by one thing: their desire for what they didn't earn. And once I saw the pattern, I realized something powerful. Greed makes people careless. Greed makes people reckless. And when people are reckless, they leave a trail. It wasn't long before they crossed the line completely. They started arguing openly, trying to manipulate me directly, accusing me of hiding wealth, questioning my intentions. "You're not even using it properly," Lena said one evening, her voice dripping with accusation. "Why can't you just let us have some?" My mother chimed in, a mixture of disappointment and pressure in her tone. "We're family. We should benefit together. You can't just keep it all to yourself." Milo's face was twisted with frustration and greed, and I realized then that subtlety wouldn't work anymore. They weren't going to stop. Their obsession had grown into a full-blown compulsion, one that ignored all respect and decency. That night, I felt the first true sting of betrayal. I had always believed family meant loyalty, protection, love. But what I saw in their eyes was something darker. Self-interest, calculated ambition. They weren't thinking of me as a person anymore. I sat quietly in my room, clutching the bag to my chest, listening to their whispers, plotting, and scheming as if I was invisible. That's when I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. If I didn't act, I would lose everything. Not just the bag, but the respect, the dignity, and the control of my own life. And in that moment, a resolute began to form inside me. If they were going to betray me, if they were going to push me to the edge, I wouldn't break, I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't surrender. I would fight back, but not with anger or violence. I would fight back with strategy, with patience, with the quiet, slow-building force of someone who finally understands the weakness of those blinded by greed. The breaking point came subtly, not with shouting or confrontation, but with a small, seemingly innocent remark during dinner. Milo asked, "When will the bag start giving again? It's been so long." Lena leaned forward eagerly. "Maybe we need to try something new. Maybe she's not doing that right." Even my mother, usually the calmest of all, nodded, as if I had done them some personal wrong. The greed in their eyes wasn't hidden anymore. It was raw, exposed, demanding, and insatiable. And at that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I realized that I could use their own greed against them. Every attempt they made to manipulate, every plan to coerce, every desperate glance would be a step deeper into a trap they didn't even know existed. Their obsession made them predictable. Their entitlement made them reckless. And my patience, my careful planning, made me untouchable. The stage was set. The pieces were in place. All that was left was for them to act. And when they did, I would be ready. I held the bag close that night and whispered softly, not out of need, but out of understanding. "You may try, but only those who approach with respect will find what they seek." And for the first time, I truly believed it. Not because the bag was magical, not because I had power over it, but because I had learned something far more important than wealth. Power comes not from what others take from you, but from understanding what they cannot take. Their greed grew faster than I ever could have imagined. At first, it had been subtle, almost harmless curiosity. But now it was like a storm I could see coming from miles away, unstoppable, devouring everything in its path. Every time I walked into the room, I could feel it in the air. A tension that wasn't just irritation or envy, but a raw, desperate hunger that made their eyes sharp and calculating. Milo would sit silently at the edge of the couch, pretending to read something, but I knew he was watching me, counting, imagining how to take what wasn't his. Lena was worse. She hovered over me at the kitchen counter, helping with nothing, offering suggestions on how to use the bag, all with that little gleam in her eye that spoke of expectation, of ownership she didn't deserve. And my mother, the woman who had always claimed to know better, began asking pointed questions, trying to convince me that family meant sharing everything, even if it was my private treasure.
I tried to stay calm, tried to ignore their subtle manipulations, but their behavior was becoming reckless, and reckless people are easy to read. I began to notice patterns. Milo always approached when he thought I was distracted. Lena always made suggestions designed to make me doubt myself. And my mother had a way of phrasing her concerns as advice while applying pressure without me noticing. They weren't just greedy, they were predictable. Their obsession blinded them. They were no longer thinking about what was right or fair, only about what they could take. And that made them dangerously easy to manipulate. One evening, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. They thought I wasn't listening, but I was closer than they realized. Milo whispered urgently, "If we can just get her to show us a little, we could figure it out. One coin is enough to know the rest." Lena laughed quietly. "One coin? That's not enough. She's hiding more. I can feel it. We need the whole bag." And my mother, usually careful with words, muttered in agreement. "We've been patient too long. She's keeping us from what's rightfully ours." Rightfully theirs. The words themselves made me shiver. They weren't thinking about fairness. They weren't thinking about me. They were thinking only about taking. I realized then that subtlety would no longer work. Pleas, explanations, calm reasoning, none of it would matter. Their obsession had grown beyond reason. And as I watched them, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I wasn't just holding on to a bag. I was preparing to show them the consequences of their own actions, to let their greed become the trap that would undo them. It didn't happen all at once. It started with small tests, almost playful, but carefully calculated. I would leave the bag in plain sight, just for a moment, and watch them hesitate, trying to resist. Their hesitation never lasted long. The pull of greed was too strong. They began arguing openly now, trying to convince one another to take it, to act first. It was almost comical if it hadn't been so sad. I could see the desperation building, the tension stretching tighter every day. And then came the moment when everything changed. One night after dinner, I returned to my room and found them standing near the bag. Milo had his hands hovering over it. Lena was whispering, "Just a little, no one will know." And my mother was leaning in, nodding like a conspirator. Their eyes met mine, and in that instant, I saw it clearly. They had crossed the line. This wasn't about curiosity or a small mistake. This was about full-blown entitlement. They expected me to surrender what was mine, to hand it over, because they wanted it more than I did. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, watching their expressions tighten with surprise. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just let them see me, calm, collected, and completely aware. The power had shifted. They had acted out of greed, and in doing so, they had revealed exactly how far they were willing to go, and more importantly, exactly how easy they were to outmaneuver. I began quietly planning my next move. I wouldn't react immediately. I would wait. Every slip, every greedy glance, every whispered plan they made would be recorded, remembered, used. I started leaving small hints, subtle nudges that suggested the bag was ready to give again. Just enough to lure them further, to make them think the next opportunity was theirs for the taking. Each day their obsession deepened. They argued, schemed, and plotted, while I remained calm, watching, learning, and preparing. It was almost too easy. Their patience had vanished. Their caution had vanished. Every moment of greed made them bolder and more careless. They didn't realize that with each step they took towards the bag, they were stepping into a trap of their own making. The tension in the house became unbearable. You could almost cut it with a knife. The desperation, the whispered calculations, the longing glances. And I knew the breaking point was near. It came one night like a storm. Milo and Lena cornered me in the living room, trying one last time to manipulate me with words, guilt, and fake concern. "We just want what's fair," Lena said, voice trembling, but her eyes gleamed with raw desire. Milo leaned in. "We've been patient. We've waited for you to trust us. Now it's time to share." Even my mother, who usually disguised her intentions, looked at me with the mixture of expectation and accusation. That's when I realized the moment had arrived. Their greed had reached the point where they would act recklessly, openly, without considering the consequences. The trap I had been preparing would now spring, and I was ready. I stepped back, my heart steady, my mind clear. I didn't need to threaten or yell. I didn't need to act with anger. All I had to do was let them take the next step. And as they did, their obsession would become their undoing. The bag, the magic, and my careful preparation would reveal every secret, every betrayal, every greedy thought they dared to act on. The breaking point had come, and I could feel the moment stretching, fragile, intense, right before everything changed. I spent the next few days quietly preparing.
I imagine their surprise, the shock on their faces when the consequences of their obsession became undeniable. I had recorded small slips, noted secret conversations, remembered every scheme they had whispered. It wasn't about punishment, it was about justice. Their behavior had revealed exactly who they were, and it was time for the world, or at least for me, to reflect that truth back at them. On the evening that I finally decided to act, everything seemed ordinary. Dinner was quiet, just the way they liked it before a storm. I carried the bag into the living room and placed it on the coffee table. Not hidden, not guarded, completely exposed, like a prize waiting to be claimed. The subtle change in my posture, the calm in my eyes, was enough to make them lean forward, anticipation and greed mingling on their faces. I said nothing. I smiled just slightly because I knew they wouldn't be able to resist. As predicted, Milo was the first. He reached toward the bag, just a hand hovering over it, testing, calculating. Lena whispered encouragement, and my mother leaned closer as if that somehow justified what they were about to do. That's when I spoke. My voice was calm, steady, but firm. "Do you really think you can take what isn't yours? Do you think I wouldn't notice every little thing you've done to get here?" The shock on their faces was instantaneous. Milo froze mid-motion, Lena's smile faltered, and my mother's eyes widened in disbelief. Their plan, which had seemed so clever in whispers and hidden corners, collapsed in a single moment of clarity. I let them stew for a few moments, letting the tension stretch and twist in the room. You've all shown who you truly are: greedy, impatient, careless, and now the consequences are yours. I reached into the bag and pulled out a single coin, holding it high for them to see. It wasn't just a coin, it was the symbol of every time they had tried to manipulate, every moment they had betrayed trust. And in that moment,
They understood. Their faces fell, a mixture of shame, frustration, and disbelief. They realized that their obsession, their entitlement, had made them predictable, exposed, and powerless. The bag hadn't betrayed them. I had. But it wasn't me alone. It was the way they had allowed their greed to rule them. I let the silence stretch, letting them feel every second of it, the weight of their choices pressing down like a stone they couldn't lift. Slowly, they began to speak, fumbling for excuses, justifications, apologies. But I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The lesson had been delivered. Their ambition had driven them to the edge, and they had fallen, not because I wanted them to, but because they had chosen to act without integrity, without respect, without understanding. I carefully returned the bag to its safe place, out of reach, untouchable, but not hidden. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I simply let them sit with what they had learned. The wealth, the magic, the possibilities. It wasn't about the bag itself. It was about understanding boundaries, respect, and the danger of allowing desire to overtake reason. They would remember this moment forever, the day their obsession finally met its match. As the days passed, life began to settle. The tension in the house eased, replaced with the quiet respect they had never shown before. They no longer whispered behind doors or plotted in shadows. Their eyes, once filled with greed, now held a cautious acknowledgement. They had learned in the hardest way possible that obsession and entitlement carry consequences that cannot be escaped. I, on the other hand, had learned something equally important. I had learned the power of patience, of observation, of strategy. I had learned that true strength is not in what you possess, but in knowing how to protect what matters and to hold people accountable when they betray trust. And most importantly, I had learned that justice doesn't always have to be loud or violent. It can be quiet, precise, and devastating in its own way. The bag remains in my care, a symbol of opportunity, protection, and the life I had built. But the greatest lesson it had given me wasn't wealth, it was clarity. Wealth can be taken, lost, or misused, but wisdom, foresight, and courage, those are the treasures that no one can steal. And as I looked at my family, now humbled, reflective, and aware of the consequences of their own choices, I felt a strange sense of peace. I understood then that revenge isn't about hate, it's about balance. It's about making people see themselves clearly, facing the truth of their actions. And for anyone who ever thinks greed or obsession is harmless, I would simply say this. The most dangerous traps are not built from anger or desire. They are built from patience, understanding, and the knowledge that the choices we make define the life we live and the lessons we leave behind. And in that quiet, undeniable truth, I found not just justice, but freedom.